Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about Ketu and Rahu. This is a very important part of Vedic astrology, and I want to first begin that a lot of people refer to these graha as shadows. I feel like there's so much more influence than just that, and I'm going to get into why I feel that way in this video. These graha zones occur exactly opposite of each other on the terrestrial moon's orbit path around the Earth. But the energy Ketu and Rahu give actually reside in a place, like all the other graha, that is indescribable. They're in deeper realms of consciousness. I want to refer back to my video on the planet significance. When I told the story of Vishnu's avatar Kurma, the tortoise avatar, and Kashira Sangara, or the churning of the ocean, the serpent in that story, Vasuki, is also referred to the Kundalini. The Kundalini, it sits tied to the Muladhara chakra. And only by Nadi is this Kundalini sustained by the flow of pranic energy. So basically, you have your inner self, and the Kundalini is the Muladhara chakra is towards the bottom, and if you kind of look at the chakras as kind of like the center of your body, starting from the top of your head all the way down to the base. So your inner self. So this Kundalini is tied to that chakra. And when I say nadis are like, they're like energy signals that go up and down throughout your body all day long, especially like in that area where the chakras are. So these nadi energy signals are basically carrying pranic energy. So when we breathe in and we breathe out, that's how if we can't breathe, then there's no life here on Earth. So this Kundalini, when it gets awakened, that means that the person is in the purest form of consciousness. And Ketu and Rahu are always symbolized in the physical form as a serpent to represent this process. And I'm going to get into that in more detail here. But I do want to point out that serpents, especially in Vedic literature, represent karmic dealings. And in terms of Ketu and Rahu, these karmic samsara ties have to be unwound and figured out in order for the energy to be utilized properly. So when we think about the churning of the ocean, and we think about Vasuki, which was the snake used to churn the ocean. So we had the Asuras on one side, and we had the Devas on the other side, because everybody wanted to get what was coming from the ocean. So they decided to work together on this. And so one end, the Asuras would pull, and then the Devas would pull. So it was creating a churning. And so this Rahu and Ketu axis is symbolizing that as well, but in our inner core. So basically we all, and when I say samsara, that means that you're coming back to the life again. And when a person gets enlightened and they achieve moksha, and they don't want to come back again, then they're going to have that opportunity not to come back to this samsara again and again and go through the ups and downs of life, so to speak. So we're all here, and maybe you're a good person. I'm not saying that, you know, everybody here on earth is evil, but our karmic deeds brought us back to the earth again, back to the samsara. So basically Rahu and Ketu, and remember, they're always depicted as a serpent, like a cut in half serpent. So these are like the churning in our life. So we have all the planets giving us energy. We have the nakshatras giving us energy. And lots of other elements, earthly elements that are giving us energy. And the deities themselves as forms of energy, giving energy also. And Ketu and Rahu are basically like they're on the two ends. Okay, and both of them pull, one of them pulls and then the other pulls, and they churn. And so in our lives, it's kind of like well, maybe I shouldn't get into this right now until I describe what Ketu and Rahu are first. That's what I think I'll do. So we have this visionary that I've set up right now. And so let me first get into the details about Ketu and Rahu. So Ketu and Rahu, first of all, are equal counter energy forces of dispassion and attachment. So you always have to keep that in mind. Because when we think of the life, we want moksha. And how do we get moksha? We have to have some element of dispassion for the life. And how do we live on life? How do we achieve things? Even to achieve things to get moksha. But how do we get money? How do we survive? We have to have that drive. And so that's why the other side, we got to have attachments. We have to have, we have to have that drive, that inner drive to be motivated to either do moksha or do our jobs or whatever. So that's what Rahu and Ketu are kind of representing as energy forces. And it's so important. It's not just something like, oh, you can just forget about it, because basically if Ketu and Rahu are not functioning and they're dormant, then basically either your drive will not be working properly, your drive in life, or you'll be too attached and you'll get attached to things easily, and you'll just keep coming back to samsara again and again and again and again. And just keep returning back to life again and again. And just kind of like a endless rabbit hole, if you will. And so we need these two forces. So the other planets also the other graha, everything has to be in alignment. Everything has to be functioning. So when I say Rahu and Ketu on their axis, if they're dormant, then, nothing's going to work. And that is true to a sense. But the same thing goes, like if you have everything going well with your other energy sources, but your Rahu and Ketu are not, they're dormant, so to speak. We're not thinking about them. We're just kind of just oblivious to the whole idea. Then the drive and the dispassion will be not letting you live to your full potential. So while the energy of Ketu and Rahu cannot be destroyed, it can shift its nature and change its forms. So that's why we have to make sure that we're giving an equal balance, because on the flip side, what could happen if we have too much of Rahu, which is too much drive or attachment or obsession, or if we have too much Ketu, which is too much dispassion, too much detachment. If one of these balances is outweighing the other one, then issues will happen. So it's kind of like, and I hate to describe this situation like this, but I'm going to make it easy for you folks, and something that just keeps coming to my mind is like a stereo. So let's say you have a stereo and you have all these different, knobs that you can, equalize the music. So you have a stereo, and all the planets have their own knobs. As a matter of fact, the planets are like the making of the stereo themselves. So like the outer physical part of the stereo. So you got to have those to function. But Rahu and Ketu are like the levelizers. So like you can have everything working, but if the volume is completely turned up and you're full of dispassion, which is Ketu, then you're not going to be able to even understand because the volume's too loud. Or maybe I should have used Rahu for that one. But and then on the flip side, if you've got too much Rahu and too much attachment to the life and too much, too much holding on to the worldly things, then the volume will be all the way down. So you got to get this churning that Rahu and Ketu create in our energy source, in ourselves. It has to be equalized. And the other graha, they're kind of like the makeup of the whole stereo. So if those aren't working, then you don't even have a stereo, So everything has to be perfectly proportioned and working properly. And so Rahu and Ketu have to be definitely taken very seriously, because they're the drive and the dispassion that we all need. Like a lot of people think, oh, we just need the drive. But forget about the dispassion. No, we need the dispassion too. And as a matter of fact, we need the dispassion more than the attachment. You know what I mean? But not when I say more, I don't mean that you break the balance. I mean, it has to be totally balanced. And so maybe dispassion has a heavier weight than attachment. So it's not like they're breaking the balance. It's just instead of having 10 little attachments, only one dispassion will equal the same as the 10 attachments, if that makes any sense. But so, and I know a lot of this might not make any sense, and a lot of people who might stumble on my video might think that this is all hocus pocus. But in Vedic culture or Sanatana Dharma, symbols are used a lot. So when I tell you a story, such as like the planets, such as being people, like Shukracharya, like Mongol, and Jupiter or Brihaspati. When I'm telling these ancient literatures, symbols are used to describe these energies. Why? Because we relate to symbols. We can form a belief and understand these energies better when it has a symbol. If I just tell you that everything is energy and this whole world is Maya, yes, I'll be telling you somewhat of the truth, but it's a lot easier to understand when we have symbols and we have stories and we have things that we can base it off of so that we can understand the energy and how it works. So it's not, maybe it didn't happen in the literal sense, like maybe, the nakshatras, for example, the 27 nakshatras, when they're referred to as the 27 daughters of Daksha, they're not literally daughters, but they are. You know what I mean? So we need that symbolism so that we can identify that there's 27 energies called nakshatras and how they go together with the moon. So I don't want a lot of people who are watching my videos to think that this is all just lullabies and, make-believe. It's not. And I've studied a lot of different, cultures also. So this is Sanatana Dharma and is probably the most intrinsic and valuable lessons about life. So back to this video, and I hope that helped you get a little bit of an understanding. So a little bit more about Ketu and Rahu. So these axes, these energy axes, Ketu seems to be more of the, the detachment. And that's not always a bad thing. If everything is aligned and properly working, and your energies are working properly together, then you're going to have the right levels of detachment. Because on the other hand, if you're with like Rahu, for example, if you're just obsessed about gaining things, and what's going to end up happening is, number one, you'll never be satisfied. You'll just keep wanting more and more and more. And number two is that if you don't get what you're desiring so much, you're going to get really angry. And so those two outcomes are going to cause a lot of issues. Now, let's flip it. With Ketu, I said dispassion is important, and it is, because you have to be able to draw the line between obsession and drive. having a drive to achieve something in life, having a drive to attain moksha, having a drive to take care of yourself mentally and physically, to have a drive to do things for others, and to have a drive to, make the world a better place, so to speak. But let's say that you've got too much of the energy with Ketu that's outweighing, and this churning that this axis is doing, it's more is being pulled on Ketu's side. And so what's going to happen is you might be so detached that you might become scared to go somewhere because you don't want to be around anybody. You want to be by yourself all the time. And you won't know how to deal with other people because you'll think, I'm detached, I don't need anybody. And so when people come into your life, you're just like, I don't need you. And so you get uncomfortable being around people. And so, and you could even stop taking care of yourself. You could, if it got so bad, like you wouldn't even care if you became homeless. You wouldn't care, if you became homeless, you were, not answering people when they talk to you, and you weren't even trying to have any purpose in this life. You know what I mean? And I mean, these are really deep, like, debilitations, so to speak. But I mean, even if it's just a little bit off balance, it could cause, that churning could cause issues in your life. So even if you're just a little bit too detached, it'll make you you got to be able to have that drive to get that moksha, to attain something that will make your life better. And if you have just a little bit too much of the Rahu energy, where you're, just obsessed with gaining worldly gadgets and possessions and, attachments, if you're just a little bit too much, then it could lead into more and more and more. Because when it comes to the Rahu energy, and that one's the hardest one to deal with, because everybody likes to satisfy themselves, right? Everybody likes to have good food. Everybody likes to feel loved. Everybody likes to have power. Everybody likes to have money, to get what you want. Everybody likes that. So that's the hardest one, So even if that's just a little bit off, it could start off that way, but then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it becomes a major problem. And then you'll never get moksha if you're just focused on this worldly gadgets and the worldly life and desires. And plus, on top of all that, everything that we have a hold on, we're not going to have a hold on it forever. So we have to know how to let go. You know what I mean? So that's why these two graha are so important, because they're the ones who are amplifying the planets, the energy that we get from the nakshatra, from the graha, from other things around us. They're the source that is basically pushing that nadi, the nadi up our chakra, our whole chakra list. So we need that. We need that. We can't have these two axes dormant or not functioning properly, because otherwise it's gonna taint all the other energy. If we've got too much obsession, or we've got too much attachments, or if we're too detached and we don't care about anything, we got to have them equal. And I mean, back with the symbology, with the whole Kshara Sangara, the churning of the ocean. I mean, it's just another representation of that. And it's, you know, everybody wanted. And it was like, it ended up having a lot of disastrous results, and a lot of really beautiful things came out of that ocean, you know? And we're in samsara right now. I mean, we're here. Because when you attain moksha, you don't come back. You're in another realm. unless you really want to come back. And it's not an easy thing, you know. It is one of the hardest things, is to get this access, you know, under control. I mean, I say it in this video like it's so easy. It's not. It's not easy, and it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of concentration, and you're going to forget. Sometimes you're going to forget. You're going to forget what I'm saying in this video. I even sometimes am on the brink of forgetting, because we're so caught up in samsara and keeping, you know, our daily duties intact. So we just have to make sure that, you know, these amplifiers, if you will, are churning in our energy bank the right way. And when I say energy bank, I mean our inner self. Our core. And you know, I think, you know, my motto, one of my major mottos, is that just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. You can't always see electricity, but it's there. So it's the same thing with these graha. I mean, just because they don't carry a physical proponent doesn't mean that they don't exist. They do. They do exist. And they're very important. So I think I'm going to give another example of how this access could work. How it could work properly and how it could work improperly. So let's say you have Ketu in the 6th house. And you've got, so that means Rahu will be in your 12th house. So let's say that this, well, first let's see what this is when these graha go into those houses. So when Rahu goes into the 12th house, that means that the person is going to be very attached and wanting to have, you know, distant places, monasteries, ashrams, wanting to be detached, wanting moksha, wanting to be even in foreign lands. So that's what happens when Rahu will be, his energy will be in the 12th house. Now, what happens when Ketu's in the 6th house? It means you could end up like having diseases that you don't care about. You could have enemies that you don't care about. and you could have issues with even your friends that you don't really care about. And one thing I do want to mention, and absolutely for sure, most people, because this concept, after you understand it, it makes a lot of sense. But this whole concept is not an easy thing to grasp, because a lot of cultures, they don't even teach it. So, but these graha, usually when you're younger, you don't have those issues. Like the Rahu and Ketu are not functioning. They're not. You don't see it as well as when you're older. So maybe you have Rahu in the 12th house, but maybe you didn't care anything about being detached or monasteries or ashrams or anything. But let's say that you're 40 years old and you probably care about it now. So, that's kind of how it works. Or maybe with Ketu in the 6th, you didn't care about enemies, but now you don't care about them. Like maybe when you were younger, you really cared about your enemies and you cared what they thought, and you wanted to try to, make them like you and, want to be around you and stuff. But now when you're in your 40s or even late 30s, it doesn't bother you at all, as a matter of fact. And the 6th house isn't really just enemies. These could be, and when I say enemies, I'm not saying only people who are like directly in your face and having conflict with you. These could be people who are with you and friends with you, but behind your back, they don't like you. They talk about you. They do things to try to sabotage you. That's what I mean with a lot of, and that's what the 6th house stands for when it says enemies. It could be manifested to where they're actually doing it and you see it. But if that's not happening in your life, you have to kind of look at, what's happening behind the scenes. So when Ketu is in this house, it makes one not care about that stuff. So let's say that the balances or the kundalini or the axis of these two were not working properly. So what would happen? So with Rahu in the 12th house, maybe you would be like really, like you wouldn't go to work unless you could work in a place that was secluded. Like you needed money to live, but you wouldn't do it. You refused to do anything because you were completely hell-bent on working at a place that was like, in a lab or somewhere where you weren't around anybody. And then let's say Rahu energy was okay. And you were okay with the 12th house issues. You liked working in the lab. You liked to be in secluded places, foreign places, ashrams. You liked that to a healthy level. But let's say Ketu was falling a little bit dormant. Then maybe you would have people sabotaging you and you wouldn't even know it. And like maybe other people all around you would see that, hey, this person is just there, they just want you to write up this proposal, and then when you write it, they're not going to give you anything, or they're not going to give you what they promised as your pay. And like everybody knows it, but you won't believe it because you don't care. So that's what could happen if Ketu was a little bit too dormant. And if both of them were dormant, you would have both sides, you know, kind of going wacko about it. And it would mess up a lot of other stuff in your chart as well. You would just have kind of a warped idea of, you know, how to, because you'd be amplifying the power from all these other graha as well, because you're the one churning. Rahu, Ketu are the ones churning. So if these nadis aren't going up our chakra the correct way, so to speak, then everything's going to get screwed up. You know, not totally screwed up, but screwed up enough. So then let's say that Ketu, let's do a healthy balance on both. So a healthy balance would be, you know, when you're dealing with people who are just trying to take you for a ride, you're going to be able to say, okay, they're trying to take me for a ride, and you wouldn't care about it, but you would know that they were trying to take you for a ride. But you wouldn't get, like, you know, to the point where you were oblivious and headless and just, you didn't even know they were doing it. And you didn't care, you know. So it would be a really healthy medium. You would understand, and you would, you know, also not care at the same time. And then let's say that on Rahu's side, where everything's level, so yeah, you would want to go to an ashram, and yeah, you would want to, you know, hang out in the monastery or go to a foreign land. But you're not going to, you know, be unrealistic about it. It'll be something that, you know, is in your diary. You know what I mean? It's something that you want, and if you can attain it, then great. But if you can't, then, oh, no problem. You deal with it. So that's what, like, the healthy balance would be. And you can apply that to each axis. You know, just look at what the house represents, and then if you have other energies in there, other graha, take that into consideration. I've done videos on graha, I've done videos on bhavas, so you can see all of that. There's also something else that I wanted to mention about just how much power and how much, I mean, not only what I've just talked about, how it being so important in our lives to have the axis, you know, functioning properly, but another power representation is that so Ketu represents moksha, and because in order to get moksha, you have to have some element of detachment. You cannot be like, well, I mean, you could, I guess, be attached to the world a little bit, but you gotta have that element of detachment. And what's gonna make you be able to not get too detached to where you become like debilitated detached is Rahu, because Rahu is going to drive you to want to be leveled in your detachment. You know, you can't have one without the other. You got to have them both. And attachment and detachment are two very extremely important aspects, because the way that we attach to things, and we attach to relationships, attach to objects and gadgets, is going to determine whether we're going to be successful in our inner life as well as our outer life. And you've got to have detachment in order to attain moksha. So these nakshatras that happen on a Gandanta, now a Gandanta is when a water element goes into fire element. It's a really chaotic period, and it's full of energy. So let's use the Gandanta of Ashlesha to Magha. So Ashlesha is the water sign going into the Magha fire sign. And all of these Gandanta that when it goes into the fire are ruled by Ketu. And all of them that are leaving the water sign, part of the Gandanta, and going into the fire, those all happen in Mercury. So it's just the two. And it's very important. It just shows how much power and meaning there is in these axes. They're very powerful points, and they signify a great deal. You know, if you're ever having any issues with your Rahu, there's a really nice quote from the Mahabharata that I like a lot. It says, desire is never extinguished by enjoyment of desired objects. It only grows stronger and stronger, like a fire fed with clarified butter. Desire is the source of endless problems. So that's a really good, mantra or a motto, if you will. If you're, having trouble with being too attached or desired, and believe me, it's an easy thing to happen. It's not easy to not want to satisfy yourself. Believe me, it's not. But it does get easy after you do it for a long time. After you realize there's other things that can make you happy on the inside and from within yourself. And if you have, issues of being too detached, you can use things like yantras. Yantras are full of energy. And I mean, your whole body is like a yantra. It helps you, if a yantra is well proportioned, perfectly proportioned, you're going to receive a lot of energy from that. And the same thing like with our inner body, like all these graha and these energies that we receive, if everything is perfectly proportioned or at least very well balanced, then it can work like a yantra and you can have all kinds of energy. So something with Ketu would be just always know to put the pedal to the metal when it comes to wanting to attain moksha. To be ultimately detached, you can think you're detached in samsara, and you can be to a sense. But to really, really be attached, you got to have that drive, which is Rahu's part, to get all you can to attain that moksha. So I hope both of those ideas helped. And I want to thank you so much for coming and listening. And I hope you have a great night.